the sawdust off your feet, but you can't shake it out of your heart. Come again, folks. The greatest show on earth. Come again.
Well, the Saturday film next week includes some of the most breathtaking aerial action ever filmed and goes back to the colourful world of the flying circus as Robert Redford plays the part of the daredevil flyer of the barnstorming 20s, Waldo Pepper. That's next week at the earlier time, 6:15.
Programmes for Sunday evening on BBC1. At 7:15 in open all hours, Granville is worried about Arkwright.
I don't know. I never thought that I'd live to see the day. You gave somebody his money back.
All right. Don't worry. When I get to heaven, I shall be plead insanity.
At 7:45, Yul Brynner stars in The Double Man as a CIA agent investigating his son's mysterious death.
You don't give up easily, do you?
No.
Omnibus at 9:40 joins the BBC Symphony Orchestra in rehearsal and talks to guest conductor Leonard Bernstein. At 10:35, another edition of Choices presented by Libby Purvis, and on the panel, lecturer Valerie Fisher, novelist Edward Blishen, and historian Paul Johnson. At 11:10, Searching for the New Zimbabwe, a panorama special which looks at the country's progress 2 years after independence. And at midnight, Phil Silvers rounds off Sunday evening on BBC1.
In 30 minutes, Jimmy Hill introduces highlights from the games between Swansea City and Manchester City and Blackburn Rovers and Watford in Match of the Day. That follows an extended bulletin of news on BBC1 with Michael Sullivan.
The British task force continues to sail south, preparing for battle if all else fails. Alexander Hague's been talking all day in Buenos Aires, but the outcome's far from clear. Distressed Falkland Islanders plead for help from Britain.
You know, for Christ's sake, somebody out there, do something. Something, anything.
The Queen gives Canada back her constitution. And Princess Anne runs into trouble in the Badminton horse trials. Changes of mood and changes of plan have marked today's diplomatic round in Buenos Aires, where the American Secretary of State has been holding crucial talks with the Argentine leaders about the Falklands crisis. At one stage, Mr. Hague's departure for London appeared imminent, and that aroused cautious optimism. Then came gloom as more talks were held, and now it seems he may be going straight to Washington instead of coming to London. Michael Burke's been following events in Buenos Aires.
When Mr. Hague left his hotel in Buenos Aires this morning, his negotiations had appeared to be almost over. There was no official word of the terms of the settlement he's been putting to the Argentine government, but it's thought here they include the withdrawal of both sides' armed forces, joint civilian administration of the Falklands, and eventual transfer of sovereignty to Argentina. It looked as though he would soon be on his way to London. Mr. Hague's plane has been standing here at the airport since early this morning, waiting to take him to London when and if the Argentine government agrees to his new peace proposals. That agreement appeared to have been almost reached late last night. The American party's bags were loaded onto the plane as Mr. Hague paid a last courtesy call on the Argentine President, General Galtieri. But it wasn't to be as simple as that. As the negotiations became bogged down again, additional flight plans were filed for the plane. If there was no agreement to take to London, he would return to Washington or go to Venezuela to await developments. It was the Argentine Foreign Minister, Mr. Costa Mendes, who warned Mr. Hague today that agreement would not be as easy as both men had thought. Mr. Hague went to see the President, General Galtieri, a repeat of their meeting yesterday. This time, the President had discussed the proposals with the rest of the junta and with all the army generals. The sticking point was any concession at all over sovereignty. It's said here that Mr. Hague has been blunt with the Argentines, pointing out the proposals are the last chance for peace, that he needs an answer one way or the other. The talks still go on. Agreement, according to one government source, is possible.
The confusion and uncertainty emanating from Buenos Aires is reflected in London tonight.
Mrs. Thatcher returned unexpectedly from Chequers 2 hours ago and was joined at number 10 by Mr. Francis Pym, the Foreign Secretary, and the Deputy Prime Minister, William Whitelaw. They're still there, and I understand that within the last hour they've received indications that Mr. Hague will not be coming to London from Buenos Aires, but will be flying straight to Washington. What isn't clear is the significance of that. Does it mean the peace mission has failed? Or could it be that Mr. Hague is going to Washington to tell President Reagan he's achieved something and allow the President to announce it? The occupants of Downing Street are amongst those trying to clarify the situation. All a spokesman there will say is that they have not been in direct touch with Mr. Hague since he left here on Tuesday. The message he took with him then was quite clear. All things are, as they have always been, negotiable, but not until Argentine forces have pulled out and British administration has been restored. Unless the Argentines are prepared to accept that, there is no point in you coming back, was the polite but firm message Mr. Hague took with him. Well, at that point, Mr. Hague went to Washington for a rethink with President Reagan about the fence-sitting policy, spurred on, no doubt, by the increasingly hostile reaction in the United States to what Mr. Reagan himself called his even-handedness. And so Mr. Hague has been putting the screws on the Argentines. The problem is that there's very little point in President Galtieri giving way if it also brings him down, which is why Mr. Hague's departure from Buenos Aires has been on and off with a dizzying frequency during the day, and why what are described as grim-faced junta generals have been rushing around Buenos Aires consulting with each other.
The British Naval Task Force is now well south of Ascension Island. Our reporter Brian Hanrahan and a camera crew are with them aboard HMS Hermes. They've been watching preparations for any possible action, including the arrival of the force commander, Rear Admiral Sandy Woodward. Later in the programme, we'll have a full report from the fleet. More Argentine warships have also put to sea. They've been slipping out of the harbour at Buenos Aires over the past few days, but that's thought to be more a morale-boosting exercise. Supply ships have been seen leaving Puerto Belgrano, about 350 miles south of Buenos Aires. The first independent film report from the occupied Falklands, not shot by Argentine invaders or their friends, has now reached us. It was made by an American NBC crew and taken to Buenos Aires. Christopher Morris reports from there.
This is the air bridge from the mainland to the Falklands, how Argentina is able to beat the Royal Navy's blockade of the islands. Port Stanley's airport hasn't even had to be extended for the huge airlift now going on. As many as 100 flights a day are bringing in reinforcements, arms, ammunition and supplies as the British task force approaches. The air bridge is vital and Britain knows it, warning that the blockade will soon be extended to include Falklands airspace too. The military commander, though, is concerned about how the British residents are reacting to the occupation forces.
The people of the islands is now, I think, a little afraid in order it will be military operation here. And we have no many time to speak with the people.
Along the road from the airport, there's an almost constant stream of soldiers marching to take up defensive positions in and around Port Stanley. And in the island's capital, troops have taken over houses left empty by British residents who fled into the countryside. For those who've stayed behind, even walking down the street is a nerve-wracking experience.
Never known anything like it. I just don't like it.
Do you feel like a hostage here?
Well, more or less that. Because there's not much we can do. You're not allowed to go out of the town. Or even go into your home up on the hill there without all their authority or authorization and all the rest of it.
Have they told you you can't leave the town?
They haven't said we can't leave, no. It was very difficult to leave.
Would you like to leave and get out of the islands?
Well, if we were all taken out of it, yes, but otherwise, no.
Only about 300 of Port Stanley's residents now remain. The other 700 have fled to remote farming settlements seeking refuge. The streets now are practically deserted, apart from the soldiers, of course. Over 10,000 of them now on the island, their guns at the ready, a bewildering sight for the Britons who are now effectively hostages.
we were supposed to carry on as normal. Right? These arrows show suddenly you've got to change the way you run your traffic. How can you carry on as normal? It's ridiculous. The people here don't want Argentine rule.
The minister of the Anglican Church says the island's now an armed fortress.
As you look around, you will see that there are troops on every corner, and these have been thinned out considerably in the last 2 weeks. But for at least 2 years, we've lived almost without a police force. The people here are not used to the sight of guns, and you can't talk to a person if he's poking a gun at you all the time. The only conversation we get from these people is a gesture with a gun.
At the local supermarket, food supplies for the islanders are dwindling fast. There's been almost panic buying for English goods delivered before the invasion. But the only Union Jack left in Port Stanley remains unsold. No longer can children attend the local school. It's been taken over by a unit of Argentine commandos.
Why did you decide to walk out?
We walked out because we could not hold school in the conditions that prevailed immediately after the invasion. We had military presence, especially outside the junior school, the infant school. We had tanks, we had soldiers in the yard. And most of our school population were disappearing to the camp anyway, to the countryside.
I'm staying. I'm staying if it remains the Falklands, but not Argentina. I can't say anymore. It makes me so angry. The old people are frightened. They're frightened. Some of them are frightened to go out of their homes. They've been begging for food at the doors. And now I'm going to see if I can see Blue Marie, this is the chap in charge, to see if I can get something done about this old man's property. They're checking houses now to see who's left in them, who's not left in them. You know, for Christ's sake, somebody out there, do something. Something, anything. There's lots of us walking around with smiles, we're letting them laugh, you know, trying to make ourselves laugh, because we daren't set panic into these people. Somebody wants to do something, even if it's a mass, voluntary evacuation.
And now for some of the day's other news. President Brezhnev has suggested a summit meeting with President Reagan this autumn. It amounts to a counter-offer to a White House proposal that the two leaders should meet at the United Nations in June. Mr. Brezhnev said he'd be prepared to attend a meeting in a neutral country. Nearly 4,000 people marched to Trafalgar Square in London this afternoon to protest against the Pope's visit to Britain next month. The event was organised by the Protestant Orange Lodges of England, Scotland and Ireland. Nick Witchell watched the demonstration.
The Orange Order has opposed the Roman Catholic Church for 300 years. Today it made streets in central London look and sound more like Protestant areas of Belfast or Glasgow. Members of the Orange Order will spearhead protests against the Pope's visit. They won't give details of their plans, but they say they will do their best to restrain the undoubted enthusiasm of their members.
Well, we are still considering the situation with our members, but we can give our guarantee that our members will not be involved in any violence.
The Imperial Grand Master of the Grand Orange Council of the World, the South Belfast MP, the Reverend Martin Smith, delivered a petition to Downing Street. The Orangemen then gathered in Trafalgar Square to continue their protests about a visit they oppose on theological, constitutional, moral and on financial grounds.
It's not been Princess Anne's day at the badminton horse trials. After yesterday's dressage section, she was well placed for the cross-country, but that's proved difficult in the past.
And away she goes. That includes 15.2 on the steeplechase. Setting off to the first. A very stark fence. Jumps it easily. Still going very steadily, Princess Anne playing it safe, looking for that clear round. Got him beautifully balanced, beautifully controlled. A nice approach. Oh no! Just a little too slowly, I'm afraid, and down they go. Oh, what bad luck.
About half an hour later, the Queen Mother was ready to watch Captain Phillips have a go.
He's going to the bank. Oh, a very brave and generous horse, because he wasn't quite right. And well over that.
Captain Phillips has been pushed into 9th position for the final show jumping section, and the overnight leader is Richard Meade on spectator 3. In Ottawa, the Queen has proclaimed Canada's new constitution in an historic ceremony at the city's Parliament Hill. The new constitution replaces the British North America Act of 1867 and marks the end of Canada's colonial links with Britain. Francis Coverdale was at today's ceremony.
Despite a forecast of rain, the decision was taken to hold the ceremony outside. And when the Queen arrived in an open landau, it was bright sunshine. An estimated 30,000 people had crowded into Parliament Hill and the surrounding streets to watch the pageantry of the day when Canada's constitution came home. The Queen was in a relaxed mood, constantly breaking into a broad grin. It was while Prime Minister Trudeau was speaking that the drizzle started, but it didn't dampen the crowd's enthusiasm for what he called a day of historic achievement. For 50 years, all attempts to patriate the Constitution had failed. Trudeau was the one who got the agreement, and today the royal proclamation was signed. For a moment, the drizzle stopped, but as the Queen started speaking, there was a downpour. She and the Duke were protected under a canopy, but the crowd got a soaking, and some at the back decided not to stay. The ceremony's over, 400 doves were released, or homing pigeons standing in for doves. A little boy broke through the barrier and handed the Queen some flowers as she and the Duke of Edinburgh started a walkabout. There's been controversy about the celebrations. The government of Quebec, which consistently opposed the new constitution, boycotted them. So did the Canadian Indians. But today was mostly a joyous occasion, and as the Queen ended her walkabout, even the rain stopped.
Finally, tonight, we end with a special report from that British naval task force now only days away from the Falklands. Submarines are already operating around the islands, but the bulk of the force, the best of the British Navy, is still heading south. At least 53 ships are involved overall, among them 15 warships and 26 others requisitioned by the government. Our reporter, Brian Hanrahan, is on the flagship HMS Hermes. This is his report of life on board during the first half of the voyage.
HMS Hermes put to sea in haste. Her crew scrambling back from leave, hundreds of tons of stores piled aboard. The first hours were crazy ones, tidying up people and equipment, and then buckling down to building a fighting ship. The Navy had boarded every Harrier it had and scoured its ground stations for the pilots to fly them. Skilled combat pilots though they were, they needed first to recover the skill of operating on a moving deck at sea. The exercise also meshed the squadrons into the ship's system. They meet through the flight deck officer. Brightly clad in yellow jacket, he marshals the aircraft with the clarity of a mime artist, trying to keep planes and people apart, Harriers and helicopters airborne simultaneously. Constant drills day and night sharpen reaction, squeezing minutes off response times. The Damage Control Center, HQ1, monitors the time taken to seal up the ship against attack. Experienced petty officers instruct young seamen in the unchanging routines of shoring up bulkheads against leaks.
Look in the top there, on the pad piece.
Good defense, we were told, can save the ship, even if it's hit. In flight controllers everywhere on the ship, asbestos masks and gloves are worn to protect against the flash of fire or explosion. But the direction of the flight deck continues as the crew learn to go on, increasing in efficiency despite the cumbersome precautions. As the ship churns steadily south, a bustling island on an empty sea, the crew becomes more thoughtful. The news reaching us from home suggests that war is becoming thinkable, and Hermes, the flagship of the fleet, will be a primary target. There's a real chance that all this drill and practice will be needed. This is no longer a game. Today is Easter Sunday, And after the rigours of the past week, the captain has decided it's time to maintain his men rather than his machinery. Sunshine and exercise is the prescription. So for the day, flying has been stopped and the flight deck turned over to the crew for a garden party. For a few hours, the loudest noise to disturb the sunbathers were the cheers of the sports supporters. It was a holiday, not just from work, but from the cramped quarters below. To be given the run of the flight deck was luxury to men who'd just a few feet to call their own, in quarters they must share with scores of others. But despite the overcrowding, with all the extra Marines and aircrew squeezed in, some people managed to produce fancy dress. There was an American general, even an Argentine spy. A hamburger stall did a roaring trade, with a very happy leading cook helping out.
My missus had a little boy last night, 11:05, little boy, calling him Peter.
5 tons,
you think she's going to call him Peter? I know he's going to call him Peter, she better call him Peter.
In this more relaxed atmosphere, I talked to some of the crew.
We're all hoping and we're all missing our families and all that, you know, because some of us have not been home since Christmas. There's quite a lot of that, and we were looking forward to leaving that.
Slightly apprehensive at times, but we believe in what we're going down to do, so we think we'll handle the situation.
Have you made any sort of private thoughts about it?
Oh, maybe will out, that's what I mean.
You made a will out?
Oh, yeah.
One of them things, isn't it? We've got to go. Don't really want to, but we've got to.
Easter service conducted by the ship's chaplain, Roger Devonshire, also remembered the men's families. In his sermon, the Rev Dev, as he's called about ship, talked of achieving a victory, not over an enemy, but over each man's own fears and uncertainties. The finale of the afternoon was a beard auction. All beards will have to go so gas masks can fit properly. So I offered mine along with others for charity. Well, there it is, making light of a serious subject. And there could hardly be a better example of the way in which the ship is settling down to do whatever it is that it's asked to do when we get to the Falkland Islands. Easter Monday, and the Harriers are back on the hockey pitch. The pilots concentrate on combat. They go off, operationally drab, in flights 5 at a time to challenge each other. Up high in the skies, we see them battling, chasing each other's tails as they fight for the split-second advantage which could give them a kill. Fighting the Harrier is a complex business. It needs instinctive, intelligent reactions, instant coordination of radar, gun sights and controls. You have, said one pilot, to think like a train. Between the carriers, between the squadrons, between every pilot, there's rivalry. Invincible has 1 squadron, 8 Harriers to the 12 on Hermes. They believe they're the best, because they have to. They listen intently to their briefing. While the rest of the Navy fights as a coordinated team, they're the gladiators, off to single combat. Their lives depend directly on what they know and do.
The fleet's all tuned up, ready to go, and I find it very difficult to do other than think I'm going to war, which is right. I need to think that way, and my men need to think that way. I think that's the same that the captain has, and we're going to keep thinking that way until it's all fizzled out, or we actually go and sort it out with military action.
The Argentinians have much to be afeared of.
They certainly have, yes.
Invincible also houses 820 helicopter squadron with Prince Andrew as a co-pilot. Here's his helicopter lifting off.
Riflemen and GPMG gunners, pick your weapons, all dressed back. All I want left here is 66, 84 men.
With all the flying, the Marines aboard Hermes get only limited periods on deck. One of these they gave over to test firing of weapons from the stern.
Fire!
The first shot from a light anti-tank weapon won a round of applause. They went on to give a display to the ship's company. Their main anti-tank weapon, the Carl Gustav, was next. Even the cooks had a go with the spare one. All the other weapons, which hadn't been tested recently, were fired off together. Machine guns and SLRs in a clattering broadside. And the value of the morning was proved when they found one rifle that didn't work and needed replacing. This is just an operational test to make sure that every Marine knows his weapon can work, but it's doing wonders for the morale of the rest of the company to stand and watch their firepower being blasted off across the stern. The Marines' principal transport to war will be the Jungly, the nickname for the Navy officers in khaki, flying camouflaged helicopters. The helicopter gives the attacking force maximum flexibility. It doesn't even have to land. The commandos are trained to come down a rope, hand over hand, carrying a pack, a rifle at the ready. The helicopters whirl them round the deck, preparing for every sort of landing. The carrier is only a small part of a modern fighting force and carries only limited weapons. For its defense, it relies on its aircraft and escorting ships. In contrast, HMS Broadsword, one of the Navy's newest and biggest frigates, fairly bristles with missiles. She's our goalkeeper. She carries one of the world's most effective defense systems and operates close to the carrier to protect her. For several hours, the captains maneuvered within 100 yards of each other while the Marines practiced their assaults from the flight deck. With helicopters buzzing about, it required all the delicacy of the diplomatic dance going on between London and Buenos Aires. Neither ship nor aircraft used radio, so the whole complicated game was coordinated by all this lamp. Whether radio silence will help avoid detection is uncertain. Reports say Argentina is receiving information from the Soviet Union, and Soviet spy planes have been watching us.
I would imagine that they are interested. They are interested in the Western fleets and what they're doing all the time. They have a costly and widely spread effort to gain intelligence, and I would assume that they would get some here. We're used to having them around us wherever we are.
If we could turn to your potential opposition, how do you rate the Argentine Navy?
Well, looking at their lineup, they have a mixed bag of equipment. There's some which is quite old, but in many cases has been revamped. There is other parts of it which are quite modern, and much of the weaponry is modern European weaponry. They're a smaller navy than ours. They are probably quite a lot less experienced. We have the good fortune in NATO and in the Northeast Atlantic to be constantly practicing with a number of very expert navies, and we have a greater opportunity than most to keep our skills at a high level.
You have the advantage in as much as much of their equipment and some of their ships are British built.
Yes, certainly they're British built. They're good when they're British built, so I don't call that an advantage, but at least we know quite a lot about them, that's for sure.
You'd expect to have an edge over them, though, because of the training of your men.
I think we go into this with confidence. I'm sure we'd acquit ourselves with honour. I wouldn't wish to run them down in any way, but we are a very professional organisation.
The equator provided another few light-hearted hours, necessary relief from all the work. The Navy likes crossing the line, and not even the prospect of war could keep them from welcoming King Neptune, who, as usual, abused the hospitality. With so many men aboard, scant ceremony or time was wasted on individuals. The novices were captured, smeared with the most appallingly sticky concoction, and dunked into seawater by the hundred. After a safe interval, a few hours later, more sedate ceremony greeted the arrival of Rear Admiral Sandy Woodward. Hermes, now the flagship of the fleet, sailed the last few miles to Ascension Islands. At dawn, the Harriers demonstrated their skills and their weapons. A smoke target in the sea was bombed and rocketed. The escort group lined up with the carrier to watch. Flashing low past the bridge, the Harriers took aim on a flare in the sky. Their heat-seeking missiles arced across the sky, momentarily brightening the target as they hit. The Harrier pilots were enjoying themselves after 2 weeks' hard work, putting on a show for their audience. Until now, the ships have moved with the full backing of the country. What their officers fear most is a twilight period of waiting, with a loss of momentum and a possible trickling away of political support. The task force, with all its power, is ready. Britain has gathered its might. It must set its course.
That report was by Brian Hanrahan, the cameraman was Bernard Hesketh, and the sound recordist, John Jockle. Now the main points of the Falklands story again. Mr. Hague's talks in Buenos Aires are still going on, and it now looks as if he'll be spending another night there. Mrs. Thatcher and senior ministers are meeting tonight and are believed to have been told Mr. Hague will be going to Washington instead of coming to London. And it's not at all clear whether that means he's done a deal or that his mission has failed.
Good evening to you. Well, this high pressure is going to dominate the weather over the next few days. It will be moving a little bit further southeastwards and at the same time bringing the winds around more to the southeast down in southern parts, but at least it'll get warmer down there in a few days' time. But at the same time, it'll allow these Atlantic fronts to start to push in towards northwestern parts, perhaps bringing them a little bit of rain in a few days' time before they push up into Scandinavia. But let's have a look at the satellite picture, and this shows this afternoon sunshine over most parts of the country. A fair amount of cloud, though, as you see, off to the part of southern North Sea, coming down into the Midlands. This is now starting to work its way southwestwards and will continue through tonight to do so on these northeasterly winds, much the same way, in fact, as it did last night, but probably more patchy. But at least it'll keep the temperatures above freezing in the south. There will be a frost further north, though, and perhaps a few mist and fog patches as well. Tomorrow, well, a good deal of cloud around, but some sunshine, I think, for all of us. The best of the sunshine will be in western parts of England, Wales, and perhaps a brighter day in eastern parts of Scotland with the wind coming over the mountains there. A good deal of cloud in the northwest, down the eastern side and in southern parts, but in many places, as I've said, the sun will be breaking through as it did today, but in the south, still pretty cold in the wind. That's it. Goodbye.
This is BBC1, now Match of the Day.
Good evening and welcome to Match of the Day. And once again we follow the title race from the First Division and the promotion race from the Second. And in measuring Swansea's chances of catching Liverpool and Ipswich, coincidentally we find they're opposing Manchester City on Match of the Day for the second week running. And that's our main game. But it's followed by a sizable portion of a most exciting promotion contest from Division 2 between Blackburn Rovers and Watford.
A series of injuries make tonight's headlines. Aston Villa have 7 men under treatment before their European Cup semi-final in Brussels against Anderlecht. Spurs could be without 2 key players for their Cup Winners' Cup semi-final in Barcelona. Arsenal's Graham Rix is out of England's side for the European Under-21 semi-final against Scotland on Monday, and West Ham's Alvin Martin has broken his collarbone again and looks certain to lose his World Cup chance with England.
Well, we start tonight's action at the Vetchfield, Swansea, where under John Toshak, the club's progress has been little short of miraculous. While other teams like Manchester City, today's opponents, have had their ups and downs, the Swans have powered on relentlessly. Understandably, a touch of justifiable pride is in evidence. Your commentator, Barry Davis.
Be proud to be a Swan has become the Swansea City motto. And the supporters here at Vetchfield have every reason to have pride in a team which has never been out of the top 6 in its first season in the First Division. The lineup this afternoon shows the absence of Colin Owen, who has a knee injury, but the welcome return of their latest Welsh international at number 2, Chris Marustic. And it's not going to be easy for the supporters to choose their player of the year, but for sure the Yugoslav skipper, Ante Rakovic, will have many votes, as will a former winner, Alan Curtis, whose goal against Southampton on Tuesday keeps alive Swansea City's hopes of taking the title in their first season at the top. Manchester City handed the Swans their heaviest defeat when the teams met at Main Road, and indeed they led the championship race into the turn of the year. But things have gone wrong since then. They have more problems with injuries, which gives a chance at number 7 to Andy May. And Joe Corrigan has gone down with a touch of tonsillitis, so Alex Williams gets only his 4th senior appearance in goal for Manchester City. Referee is Ken Baker of rugby. The recent fortunes of these two teams really couldn't be more contrasting. Swansea 2 odd goal defeats in their last 14 games. Manchester City just 1 win in 10 games and 9 goals conceded in the last 2. It's short for Ray Kennedy. Caton troubled a bit by the sun, and here's Letchford. And the shot was Saul Curtis and was wide. Well, the sun was always a problem then to Tommy Caton. And Letchford initially got away, and Curtis with a shot that was well struck, but was wide. Rustic gets away with a very strong challenge from behind. Kinsey comes inside, Reeves takes his place. It's a corner. Francis has gone to the far post. Kevin Bond has come up to the near. And here is Bond, and he gets the flick. Cleared away by Rakovic. Good cover by the skipper. But really Bond was left in rather more space than Swansea had any right to allow him. Hartford's header.